Thank you for joining the Hybrid Remote Center of Excellence. And so this is the podcast that used to be known as the Janice Oasis, and I'm Nola Simon. I'm your host. So I switched to 100% remote work in 2019, pre-pandemic. And so the reason that I did this is because I had been working some version of hybrid from 2012 into 2019. I had a really bad accident in 2018. I destroyed my car, shut down the BVP into Toronto, made people late for work because I had pneumonia, didn't realize it, my lung collapsed, and I passed out at the wheel. So one day a week with an extensive commute, because although I never moved, my commute grew from 45 minutes to 2 hours over time one way. I was working too much and I got really sick and I passed out. Anyway, so once I've recovered after a 2-month leave, I didn't want to actually have to commute anymore. So I looked for, within my company, a remote job. And so in that particular company, the only jobs that were 100% remote were sales. And so I managed to actually switch and get a sales job that was actually located and based where I live, which meant that I was driving country roads if I had to go and visit people, which was much more the experience that I wanted. Now, remote is an interesting thing because it takes some time to adapt to it. And again, my experience was impacted by COVID because I worked for that role from 2018 until December of 2020 when it was restructured. But I had gone from being in an office for 16 years. And then when I went to remote, I actually lost access to that building. So it was a process that I don't think a lot of people thought through, or maybe salespeople just have never been involved with what's happening at the main office because they've always been hired externally. It was rare, and it's not something I realized, but it was rare for people who had worked for other divisions to switch to sales. Most of the time, that role was hired externally. And people were onboarded directly into it, not having any experience with the company, not having a relationship really with anybody else. I was different. I had 16 years worth of relationships. I was involved in employee resource groups. I was involved in hackathons, innovation challenges. 6 weeks after I actually started that job, I was in the finalist for the innovation challenge, which happened to be for that particular division. And so many people had no idea how I managed to accomplish that because they perceived me as new. I wasn't new at all. I was a transfer. I pivoted my career. So with that innovation challenge in particular, I found out that my pass no longer worked. I lost access to that building. So how did I get access to the building to go and present to the CEO? I had to be admitted as a guest. How do you think that made me feel? I felt like I didn't belong, even though the work that I was doing was so valuable. I was presenting to the senior executive of that particular division 6 weeks after I actually started that job. That's not the normal onboarding process. What was even more interesting is as I actually started doing work with other divisions, I wanted to actually take my daughter in for grade 9 day became this whole thing because I didn't have an office to take her to. So what is she going to do? Watch me work? Am I going to be taking her into offices of the people I had to meet? I didn't have permission for that. And my daughter didn't really want to meet with a whole bunch of strangers around here. What was interesting to her was what I actually did with my coworkers. But again, they were distributed. So what does grade 9 day look like when there is no office and there's no one to meet because my coworkers live 3 hours away from me? I ended up actually volunteering to do a change management video. And so I got permission to go into the Kitchener-Waterloo office and attend their grade 9 day. I made an appointment to see somebody in compliance that I wanted to talk to about social media. But overall, the majority of the day was actually with our communications team shooting videos. And so my daughter actually had an incredible experience. She got to operate the video clapper for editing purposes. And we really got to tour the whole building and really experience the company, the work that I did in a very different way, because it really was focusing not necessarily on my specific sales job, but more on the employee advocacy work that I was doing to help facilitate the adoption of the renovated office. So it was a fabulous experience for grade 9 day. But that's really a gap in the understanding of how people and employees belong and engage with the office when they're 100% remote. And if you're a fully remote company, you may not have an office. In this particular case, we don't have offices because the majority of the company was working 100% in office or some version of remote. Again, sales was the rare, outstanding case where you had somebody who fully remote. Now, in order to get access to the building and to actually attend other events that I needed to, headquarters downtown, which is where I worked for 16 years, I couldn't get access. My manager didn't have access because he didn't have access, and therefore could prove my access. What made it even better is he went to his VP, and VP didn't have access either. I ended up having to work my own network to find somebody who had access to the building, who had the authority to be able to approve my access and amend my pass. And that meant that I stepped on a whole bunch of toes to be able to get, because what it did was highlight to my management team that I had a more extensive network than they did. And therefore, I could negotiate my work in a different way than they'd anticipated me being able to do. And they didn't like the fact that I enforced their lack of authority. So that's something that falls through the cracks when you've got a process that has not been imagined for the different ways that people engage with your company. It's a gap because not many people are going to experience it, and nobody's really ever thought about it. But who do you take that to? Who owns it? Because it wasn't the innovation team. It wasn't my management team. It wasn't HR. It wasn't security. It doesn't belong to anybody. And nobody really knew what to do with it. That's where the head of remote, that standalone position, whether you hire that on a fractional basis and you bring in an external consultant to do that work, or you actually hire somebody who works for your company, who facilitates and removes the friction for the staff that are working remotely, for the staff who are working hybrid, and is responsible really for understanding how those systems all work, how things make people feel. That's where that position could be useful. Just wanted to share that experience. Overall, people are liking the idea of working from home, but having access to third spaces. But there are people who want flexibility to be able to go to family, for example. I experienced that when my mom was sick with dementia and I had to take time off. It got to the point where I had to be more over at her house than I had to be here. And even though she was 5 minutes away, it was stressful for me to actually go and work there. I was paranoid that I didn't have permission to choose a different location. Now, people, I'm fortunate that my family lived 5 minutes away. What happens when you've got somebody who's sick and needing extra family support across the country? How do you facilitate? Working remotely is a way that you can support staff with their caregiving responsibilities, but it also might be you've got somebody who actually wants to attend like an executive MBA program, for example. They want to take a university across the country. Like I know a lot of people in Ontario go to Royal Roads University and they actually go to BC to actually take that course. And if you're working remotely and you've got a company that's going to facilitate that, they can do their work, but then also attend courses, right? So it's not just caregiving. There are multiple different reasons that people would actually want to work remotely. It may be just that they want to integrate their life. So during the pandemic, for example, I noticed a lot of leaders, they have cottages and they were working remotely from their cottages. And it allowed them to spend more time in environments that they really enjoy. And that's great for people who have cottages. But again, it may be that you want to travel. So is your company going to support digital nomadism? What does that look like? Is it only going to be restricted by location? Is it work from home where you actually have to be home? Is it work from anywhere you can choose as long as you're telling your company? Are there countries that you can't go to? Are you restricted to North America? What does that look like? Those are all different versions of remote, and that becomes a choice. That's where you have to define, be really transparent about what the vision is and how working in your company, why you've made those choices. The intention and the storytelling are the most important parts about strategy and hybrid. Then you get into the processes and procedures and asynchronous work and documentation and really make the implicit explicit. My story about remote work. Again, this podcast is now part of the Hybrid Center of Excellence, which is also a community that I'm building, because we need resources. And no one person knows everything there is to know about what this is going to look like for future. Hybrid remote is really the start. People are working 4-day work weeks, but really that's happening now. So what's the future look for 10 years? If you bring AI and skills and jobs are changing, is 3 days a week actually more cutting edge? What does that look? And this is where the Center of Excellence allows us the time and space to explore all of these concepts in a concrete way. So I've shared my experience, but that's the feedback that I would really like to have from other people is we need the stories. We need you to share what's working, what's not working, what you love, what you don't love. That's where engagement with the podcast is really cool, right? So on social media, find me on LinkedIn. You can write a review, and then you can also join me, which is going to be relaunching next week in December. That's my pitch. Thank you so much for listening. Talk soon.